Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on scientific publishing for early career researchers, particularly in the biomedical sciences. My name is Susanna Rantzowasu, and I'm the regional representative of the EURAXESS ASEAN project. I'm joining you from the EURAXESS studio in Bukit Batok, Singapore today, my home office, of course. And we have with us today a fantastic group of panelists that will teach us what you need to know about publishing in an evolving landscape. So we'll touch on a lot of very important issues for you as researchers that are trying to get noticed, that are trying to get your work out there, touching, for example, on open access publications, how to get noticed internationally. And who we have with us today is Teresa Ho. She is probably known to quite a few of you. I know we have quite a few participants from Singapore today. Teresa is a research fellow with ASTAR, the Agency of Science, Technology and Research here in Singapore. She is also from the biomedical sciences. She can probably say a few words about her own research later on. She holds a PhD, I think, from Cambridge University in the UK. And she's also been, as I just found out, a postdoc fellow funded by the very prestigious Marie Skłodowska Career Actions Fellowship. She was in Copenhagen in Denmark to do this fellowship. Teresa is also the president of the Postdoc and Early Career Scientists Society at ASTAR, and it's in this capacity that we've joined forces for today's webinar. But of course, I need to introduce you, or probably not, to our collaborators today from Taylor and Francis. They, of course, are the practitioners. They know exactly what you need to know to get your research noticed and to get published. And I think with this, I will hand over to Teresa. Teresa is moderating today's session. Just a little comment to all of you, you're all on mute, but please do use the chat function if you want to raise any questions. We have two presenters today, but in between we have sufficient time for Q&A, because this is supposed to be an interactive session, and this is really your opportunity to get expert advice on the publishing process. And I think with this, I will hand over to Teresa. Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Suzanne, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on a Wednesday mid-afternoon. As Suzanne said, you know, PECSS has worked with EURAXESS on several events, publicizing, co-publicizing each other's events, and we want to take care of career development for early career researchers, and this was a very pertinent topic. So I am going to introduce the speakers in a bit, but just to let everybody know, to keep things interactive, we have two polls during the course of this webinar, and you can find the link in the chat box, and you've got to use a code to access it. So right now the link for the first poll is up. We will put up the second one in the middle of the webinar. So today we have two speakers. Going first is Jonathan Patience. He is commissioning team member at manager at Taylor and Francis. He's also an in-house editor for the journal, and he manages a whole team of commissioning editors who look at content for the expert collection and Dove Press series of journals. So he's been working in the medical publishing field for 9 years, having started his career with Future Science Group. So I think he would have a lot of insight on the topics that we've laid out today for the webinar. And going second, we have Demitra ELLINA. She's Editorial Community Manager for F1000 Research. She's extremely passionate about open research and tries to engage the research community to raise awareness on this. So hopefully she can, change some of your opinions or sway you. So Jonathan, please.
Thanks, Teresa. So I'll be starting off with today's webinar, and I'll be handing over to Demitra later on. I will take myself off webcam just while I present today, and I will get up my how would I share my share my screen, show screen. Sorry. Oh, I think you might be on mute, Suzanne.
Sorry about that. I've given the presenter rights to you, so you should just be able to share your slides. I can see already your screen.
Okay,
There
could
you
you?
go. The presentation is coming up.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Great. So Taylor & Francis is a global academic publisher. We publish both books and journals. We publish around 3,000 journals. About 300 of those are in the medicine space. About 100 of those are fully open access, with the rest being hybrid. So that is with the subscription option. They are subscription journals, but they have an open access option. However, more and more journals within our portfolio are moving to become fully open access. And that includes the Dove Press company, which we acquired a few years ago. So I'll be covering the scholarly publishing and evolving landscape with you today, specifically focusing in on open access publishing models and licensing, then covering publishing ethics with a focus on 3 main topics. Then I'll be covering peer review and practice, and how to avoid some of the common pitfalls when publishing your manuscripts. And then I'll be handing over to Demitra, who will be covering preprints, open peer review, and F1000 research. But first, I'd like to do a quick poll. Could you please visit www.menti.com and enter the code 9556348. That's also available in the chat box.
Thanks, Jonathan. I will share my screen for the results of the poll. Is it showing?
Yes. Okay. It looks like most of these have come in now. Oh, still a few more to go. It seems like we're seeing a rough split between mainly postgraduate and postdoctoral researchers, which is great to see. That's roughly what we're expecting today. Also with some principal investigators and undergraduates listening today. So that's really useful to know who exactly we're talking to, and if you have any questions for us, then there'll be a space to ask that at the end. Thanks, Christy.
Okay, I've stopped sharing the screen.
Okay, I'll reshare my screen. Okay, would you be able to confirm that you could see it now?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we actually have a second poll coming up, which is just to gauge your interest in open access versus subscription. So we'd like you to please go to the next poll and answer the question: what type of publishing model do you prefer to publish under? Would that be open access, or would that be subscription, where it's free to publish, but readers would need to subscribe to read the contents? Or do you have no preference? Okay, great. It looks like we have most of the responders now come in. Yeah, kind of, I'll wait a little bit longer since there's still a few more coming in. Yeah, we're seeing about half of the people having a preference for open access, which is great to see. Open access is definitely going up in the world. Still a few people who prefer subscription and the ability to publish for free in those journals, with also quite a large number not having any preference, which is quite interesting. So perhaps the publishing model doesn't necessarily come into the decision so much for those people when choosing a journal. Great, okay, thanks, Christy. Okay, so what is open access, first of all? I expect most of you will probably already know this, but firstly, it's making content freely available online to read, which means your article can be read by anyone, anywhere. But secondly, it is also making that content reusable by third parties with little or no restrictions. And I'll be covering more about those restrictions in a later slide on licenses. Why would you want to publish open access? Well, it offers greater visibility, transparency, and impact. We found at Taylor & Francis that articles published open access typically receive 32% more citations and over 6 times as many downloads. And you may find that your fund or institution might encourage open access or even mandate it. And there may be funds available for you from them to cover those charges for publishing open access. I've included up here a couple of quotes from people who have published with us in the past. First, you have Kristen Knutson from Northwestern University, who said, open access is important because it gets the science to the public and not just to people with access to the journal. Open access definitely contributed to the reach this paper had. We also had Jonathan Edwards from University College London say that open access was of particular importance to them as authors because the review dealt with a research theme for a common medical condition and was intended to be of interest both to academic colleagues and to patients and carers who are keen to have an understanding of the science. And it just shows that I think here it kind of, the interest was mainly in trying to spread the reach of that content and really reach out to as many people as possible. So there are 2 main journal publishing models for open access. That's gold open access, which we'll be mainly focusing on here today. But also there's green open access, which I'll cover in the next slide. Gold open access is essentially where the fully final version of that published article, known as the version of record, is made free to view online by anyone who would like to read it. And that is usually funded by an article publishing charge known as an APC, which is usually paid by the authors or their funder. But it can also be funded by sponsorship and by institutional agreement with that author's institution. So perhaps the institution may have a deal with the publisher whereby all of the content that the authors publish from that institution gets made open access. There are 2 types of journals that publish open access, and they are fully open access journals, where every single article published in that journal is fully open access. And those are typically what you think about when you hear about open access journal. And there's also hybrid open access, which is where the journal is primarily subscription funded. However, it does have the option of choosing open access for authors that require it. They're known as hybrid because most of their funds come from those subscriptions, but they don't want to restrict the author choice, so they do still allow open access. What is green open access? Well, that is the deposit of an earlier version of an article in a repository, usually after an embargo period. And in this case, with Taylor & Francis for medicine journals, that's usually 12 months. So what that means is that if I draw your attention to this arrow along the bottom, you have the submission process. The submitted article is called the author's original manuscript. That's the version, that's the first draft. It's the author's version that has not had any changes done to it whatsoever yet. It goes through peer review, and then it will likely be revised by the authors afterwards before being accepted. Once that version is accepted, that version that's been revised by the authors, that's known as the accepted manuscript. That is the version that will be deposited in a repository under Green Open Access. So it wouldn't be the version of record, unlike with Gold Open Access. After the article is accepted, the publisher will usually then do copy editing and typesetting and tagging of the manuscript to make it look like that final PDF version or HTML version that you see on the journal's website. And that's known as the version of record. Okay, so how would you read an open access license? Well, the most liberal license is the CC BY license. Essentially what that means, CC means it's a Creative Commons license, and BY means that others need to acknowledge the work when they reuse it, the authors of the work when they reuse it. This is the most liberal license because it means that they can use it in any way they wish, so they can use it both commercially and non-commercially, and they can do what they want with it. So they can make translations of it, they can use figures, they can take excerpts of texts, as long as they're acknowledging the original use. So as we go along to the right here, we add in a restriction to that license. So a CC BY NC license means NC stands for non-commercial. That means that others can only reuse your work non-commercially. And then adding on an additional restriction, non-derivative, so that would be a CC BY NCND license. That means that not only can authors not use your work non-commercially, but they also can't amend your work, which means they can't take parts of it and use it in a different context, and they can't create translations and things like that. I won't really cover SA since that's less commonly seen, but SA basically stands for share alike, and it means the work must be shared under the same license as the original. However, open access does have its own challenges. Predatory journals in particular pose a serious threat both to researchers publishing the results of the work and to the peer-reviewed medical literature itself. Those publications differ from legitimate open access journals in that predatory journals subvert the peer-reviewed publication system for the sole purpose of financial gain, with little evident concern for ethical behaviour. Essentially what this means is that a predatory journal will be willing to take an author's article processing fee, and then will likely go ahead and then just publish that article, but won't have gone through any of the required processes such as ethics checks or peer review process checks to ensure that the article is the best quality it can be. So really what the author would be paying them for, they're actually not really receiving. So it's important to be very careful of predatory journals and to avoid submitting to these. So we really encourage you to check out the Think, Check, Submit campaign, available at thinkchecksubmit.org. That will give some useful advice on how to avoid predatory journals. Essentially, it's worth looking at the publisher to make sure it's a reputable, well-known publisher that publishes that journal. You can also look at the Directory of Open Access Journals, which lists all the legitimate open access journals. However, do note that that will only list fully open access journals, so I don't believe it covers hybrid journals. So if you're wanting to submit an open access article to a hybrid journal, it may not necessarily appear on that list. So just because it doesn't appear on that list doesn't necessarily mean that it's a predatory journal. So it's worth just watching out for that. And if in doubt, always go back to that Think, Check, Submit process. There's also the Open Access Society, Scholarly Publishers Association, OASPA, who are doing a lot of work to help promote open access and spread awareness of it. and they have a lot of useful information about open access up there too. There are a number of other key considerations you might want to consider, which will both impact your choice of journal in terms of where you want to publish, but also help you to avoid predatory journals. So you'd want to consider the age of the journal, how long it's been around for, what its publishing history has been, whether it's got an affiliation with a society perhaps, what the scope of that journal is, who the audience are, what the impact of the journal is, what's its impact factor, how many views are its articles getting, how many citations, etc. Who are the editorial board? Are there people that you recognize on there? Do note that some predatory journals do have editorial board members listed on their websites who may not actually know that they're being listed on the websites of their journals. So that is something to watch out for. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a predatory journal if there are people that you recognize. So if in doubt, always look back to that publisher, and you can also contact editorial board members to verify that they are on that board and to ask about submitting to that journal. You'd also want to consider the peer review publication process. Are they transparent about it? And what models do they of peer review do they use? And you'd like to, if you can, find out what the rejection rate is. That may be indicative of what sort of journal it is. So if it has an extremely low rejection rate, so you often see a predatory journal, for example, might have a rejection rate of 0% because they will literally publish everything that they receive. So that could be something to kind of look out for if it's possible to obtain those figures. So onto another poll now. I'd like to know for you what's most important to you when deciding where to publish. Would you be able to please rank in order of importance the metrics, so the impact factor, scope, whether it's a Scopus, whether it's on PubMed or not as well, the publishing model, whether it's open access or hybrid or another different type of publishing model, who the audience are, what the scope is, and who the editorial board are. Christy, I'll hand over to you for this. Okay, great. Thanks so much for your responses. That's really interesting to see. So metrics are the top. Impact factor, whether they're on Scopus or PubMed. Obviously, you want to make sure that your content is accessible and it's being read and ideally being cited. So that makes a lot of sense. Also, really good to see that scope and audience are key. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're publishing in a journal that's well suited to your work. So thanks very much for that information. Okay, so on to publishing ethics now. Publishing ethics is a really broad and wide-ranging issue. There are so many different points that come into play here. I could do an entire webinar just on publishing ethics. However, I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to focus on three main issues. To give you a bit of an idea of the sorts of issues that can arise, we often see issues to do with authorship, competing interests of the authors or the editors, duplicate submission or publication of articles, data or image fabrication or falsification, plagiarism or text recycling, peer review manipulation, or breaches of copyright. For any of these points, I really recommend that you, if you'd like some advice, or if you're not sure about a certain behavior being ethical, you can always look this up on the website here, www.publicationethics.org. That's the website of the Committee on Publication Ethics. It's known as COPE, C-O-P-E. And they have some really useful case studies, all completely true case studies that have happened with journals and how they've worked out the correct ethical procedure in more difficult ethical situations. So please do check that out if you'd like more information about some of the points not covered today. Today I'll be covering authorship, duplicate submission and publication, and plagiarism and text recycling. So firstly, authorship. What are the issues? Well, there are three main issues we see with authorship. Firstly, there's ghost authorship, which is where an author may be contributing to a paper but may not be recognized as an author on that paper. There's guest authorship, where an author may not have contributed to that paper but may have been added to that paper because maybe to bring prestige, or maybe to kind of handle maybe potential politics around that study. And there's authorship for sale, where the author can either the authors can offer payment for someone to be added to their work, or they can a well-published author could charge to be listed on their paper to add impact or weight to that paper. All of these are sort of unethical behaviors. So who does qualify for authorship? It's very important that every author on a study fulfills all four of the criteria listed here. These are known as the ICMJE criteria, and you can look them up online. But essentially, every author needs to have substantial contributions to the conception or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data for the work. And they have to have been involved in drafting the work or revising it critically for important intellectual content. And they need to have final approval of the version to be published. And they need to agree to be accountable for all aspects of the work, ensuring that questions related to the accuracy or integrity of any part of the work are appropriately investigated and resolved. Essentially, any listed author is a representative of the published paper and should have in-depth knowledge about all aspects of the study as published. The second point I'd like to cover today is duplicate submission. We really encourage all authors to only submit a study to one journal at a time. The problem when a manuscript is submitted to more than one journal at a time is that potentially that manuscript might go through peer review processes. Both publishers will be putting in a lot of work and a lot of efforts in order to ensure that that paper is reviewed accurately and appropriately. And then you may end up in a situation where that both articles get accepted for publication and will then both be published online. And it's clear in those cases that unethical behaviour has taken place because the same duplicate submission has been published. And in that case, that would always lead to a retraction. So it's very important that you always stick to one journal at a time when submitting a paper. Authors are expected to make a declaration upon submission that content is original and has not been submitted elsewhere. So not adhering to that is considered unethical behaviour. However, having said that, I would really encourage multiple pre-submission inquiries to multiple journals. So if you are trying to decide between multiple journals and where you'd like to submit, it's perfectly fine to reach out to the editor and ask whether your paper might be suitable for the journal, and also ask any other questions about the journal that might help in that decision-making process. It's fine to reach out to multiple journals all at once and then wait to receive their responses before submitting, and I would actively encourage that. When is duplicate submission potentially okay? Well, if an article was published originally in another language, then it can be okay to publish a translation of that article. This should always be at the editor's discretion, and both editors of both journals should be informed, or the editor if it's the same journal. And it needs to be made clear which version is a translation and which was the original manuscripts. The data should be presented at data that has been presented at conferences, for example, as posters or short abstracts, that will often be published somewhere. So it's fine to publish the full version of an article with a journal. That doesn't cause any problems with submission elsewhere. It's also fine to post in a repository or a preprint server such as medRxiv. So onto originality. Plagiarism, I believe most people will already be aware of. It's essentially the appropriation of another person's or group's ideas, processes, results, or words without giving appropriate credits. And that includes any content from books and websites or blogs. Even when giving appropriate credit, I really recommend trying to keep this to a minimum, because you really don't want to be including lots of content that's been taken from somewhere else. And just for originality's sake, that's good to do. Secondly, self-plagiarism, people may be slightly less aware of, so it is possible to plagiarize your own work. That's also known as text recycling. And that's the excessive repeated use of your own work. So whether that's text, figures, data, or ideas that have been copied from previous work that you've published, aside from the fact that there may be copyright issues associated with that, because depending on what the copyright issues are of the publisher that published that original work, it also leads to redundant publication. So just for originality's sake, we really encourage you to avoid that, as it also distorts the scientific record too. So onto a little quiz now. Which of these are acceptable? I'll hand over to Christy in a moment, but please could you let me know which, if any, you think are acceptable in these cases. Firstly, submitting to more than one journal at a time. If once your article is accepted by one journal, you withdraw your submission from the other journal. Second, if you include an esteemed scholar on the authorship line if they have not contributed to the paper. Third, submitting a paper that's been posted on a preprint server such as medRxiv. Fourth, including a significant amount of text from a previously published author in your paper while citing them and providing full references. Okay, thanks for providing your responses. I think we have still got a few to come in. Okay, so yes, I would agree with the majority here that submitting a paper that's been posted on a preprint server such as bioRxiv or medRxiv is acceptable. Most publishers will find that is fine. I would say that I would discourage any of the other three, to be honest, including a significant amount of text from a previously published author in your paper while citing them and providing full references. While it's good that you've cited them, and I agree there can be some confusion about this, especially if you're providing full references. If it's a significant amount of text, I'd really encourage you to try to write it out in your own words, because if you are including a significant amount of text, it would have to be in quotation marks. And for originality's sake, it would be better to try to write that out yourself. Submitting to more than one journal at a time. If once your article is accepted by one journal, you withdraw your submission from the other journal. As I mentioned, no, this is not considered ethical behaviour, even if you do withdraw your submission, because what has happened is that journal will have been putting in a lot of resource and editorial work in order to have your paper reviewed. So you'd be using up the editor's time as well as all of the reviewers' times. And then for that to be withdrawn at the point of acceptance, that's kind of a lot of waste of great work from reviewers who are essentially trying to help you to publish the top quality work. So I'd really discourage that. If you do want to make sure your journal is appropriate for make sure your article is appropriate for a journal, please instead reach out with a pre-submission inquiry. Email that editor-in-chief or email the editorial board. And they should usually get back to you to let you know whether your article would be suitable first. And yeah, fourth, at the bottom it's right to see that including a scholar, if they have not contributed to the paper, they do not count as an author if they have not contributed to the paper, so it should never be included on that paper. Okay, thanks, Christine. Okay, peer review in practice. So what would be the process that you would expect to go through once you submitted your article? First of all, before you submit, make sure that you know the journal, you've had a look at the published papers, reviewed the aims and scope, had a look at the author guidelines or instructions for authors, and make sure that your article is formatted correctly for the journal. You'd want to make sure you've proofread your article as well. Consider whether it's English polishing is needed before submitting, just to make sure that you get the most out of the peer review process, and check the bibliography and make sure you've explained any acronyms or unusual terminology. Make sure that you have everything you need to submit before submission, including all the email addresses of your co-authors, as you will likely need to enter those into any submission system you use when you submit your manuscripts. And of course, make sure you have agreement from all of your co-authors on the publishing choice and their responsibilities before submission. What are the types of peer review that you might find? Well, you would need to you'd most likely see one of these three: single blind, also known as single anonymous, double blind or double anonymous, and open peer review. Single blind is essentially where the reviewers know the identity of the authors, but the authors don't know the identity of the reviewers. And that's quite common in STM publishing. However, also common is double blind, where the reviewers don't know the identity of the authors and the authors don't know the identity of the reviewers. And then finally, we have open peer review, which Demitra will cover in more detail. And there are a few different forms of it, but briefly, reviewers essentially know the identity of the authors and the authors know the identity of the reviewers. And reviewer reports may also be published with the reviewer names if the article is accepted. Who's involved in your manuscript once you submit it? Well, there's the editor, who will be assessing the article upon submission, making sure it's suitable for the journal, firstly. They will usually select any suitable reviewers, and they will be making the final decision on the publication. The reviewers will be spending their time reviewing your manuscript in detail, checking the scientific accuracy. They will kind of be the experts in the specific area of your manuscript, and they'll give their advice and expertise to the editor. And then there's the journal staff, who will be checking the format and making sure the article fits journal requirements, and be managing any communications around the article. They will also handle production process.
Sorry,
Oh,
Jonathan,
yes.
I think your mic seems to be going off a little at times. Maybe just check it.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Just maybe check.
Has that been going off along?
It was fine at some parts, but I think occasionally it goes off and then we hear a bit muffled.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
just maybe want to, Yeah.
Check it. Okay.
It might be worth getting a headset on if you've got one.
Yeah, sure. Let me see. I'm afraid I don't have a headset at hand at the moment. Perhaps if there are any areas where people would like me to repeat, you could let me know, or if anything gets missed, perhaps let me know in the comment section or in the questions box, and I can try to answer those. Sorry about that. Would that help?
You sound fine now. I think it should be okay. Let's hope it doesn't come back again. Yeah.
Okay. I'll try to make sure
Excellent.
I speak a bit closer to the microphone just to make sure it's more even. So yes, the other things journal staff will often be doing is working on the production processes once the article is accepted, and maintaining journal systems and websites. So what's the peer review process look like? First of all, when you submit your manuscripts, you will likely go through admin checks that will potentially happen in-house, and the editor-in-chief will be assigned to that article to then make a decision on whether it's suitable for the journal. Essentially what they're doing here is checking that it fits the scope of the journal and making sure that it's the right format for the journal. If it doesn't fulfill those requirements, it's most likely that there will be a desk reject, and the paper will go back to the authors to either submit elsewhere, or to, if it's just a formatting issue, or to then they would just be asked to correct any formatting errors and resubmit it. The editor-in-chief or associate editor would then invite peer reviewers, and the reviewers would then score and suggest a recommendation for the decision for the EIC to make. The editor-in-chief will then review that feedback and send that decision feedback to the author, who will make the EIC will make a decision of either accepting a manuscript or inviting the author to revise and resubmit their manuscript with either minor or major revisions, or they will reject the manuscripts. It's much more common that if paper is going to be accepted, they will ask for some changes, because most reviewers do find some things that they think would help improve any paper. But don't be disheartened if you do see any comments asking for changes. The author would then revise and amend it, and then that would then go back to the editor-in-chief and the reviewers to make a decision on, and hopefully eventually it may get accepted. At T&F Francis, we do now have a cascading and transferring process. So if your article is rejected, we can recommend transfer to a different journal published by T&F Francis. As I mentioned before, we publish many journals, so there will usually be another journal that may be suitable, so we can make those recommendations. Especially, we know that there's many cases where the science is sound, but potentially it may just not be right for the journal at the time. So on to another quiz here. Actually, Teresa, would you be able to let me know whether you think we still have time? Because I am happy to skip over this one if we think that we are running short on time here.
Yeah, I think perhaps in the interest of time, we could leave that for later, so so Demitra can come on soon.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so responding to reviewers' comments, as I mentioned before, don't become disheartened. Most articles will go back to the authors with some comments. Make sure you've read the decision letters carefully and consult your co-authors on how to respond. Break down the comments by category, and ideally it would be great to create a list of those and make all of the suggested amendments that you can. If you don't agree with the comments or you feel like it's not appropriate, do make sure that you are explaining why you decided not to make an amendment. That will help the editor to understand why it is that you've done that, and they may agree. Make sure you've reviewed your responses twice to make sure it's clear and devoid of any frustration. That will really help the editor and help the speed with which they'll be able to get back to you. And of course, always be professional but respectful to the reviewers and the editor. Remember that the reviewers are trying to help you publish your best work. So anything that they are being asked to be critical by the journal. So they really are trying to help you out here. If your paper was rejected, don't be too disheartened. Thank the editor and reviewers for considering your paper and move on to the next journal that you may have on your list. Remember to treat it as an entirely new submission and follow the rules of the journal as you would with an original submission. Make sure also to apply the relevant suggestions you received from the previous peer review process. I'm going to skip over this here as well, just in the interest of time. I've just got a note that I may be having some audio difficulties. Can everyone still hear me okay?
Yeah, we're okay for now.
I know.
Thanks. Okay, so what are the top 10 reasons for rejection? This is the most common thing. These are the most common comments that we see from reviewers when suggesting rejection in manuscripts. Firstly, if it was sent to the wrong journal, it doesn't fit the aims and scope, or it fails to engage with issues addressed by the journal. Usually that would cause a desk reject by the editor-in-chief before it even goes to peer review. So hopefully that would save a bit of time there if you have sent to the wrong journal. Or it could be not a true journal article, so maybe it's too journalistic or clearly a thesis chapter. So in those cases, it wouldn't be suitable for submission to a journal. If the article is based on poor theoretical framework, then that can cause fundamental flaws to an article, so it may make it less easy to revise it, so that would often cause rejection. If there's a wrong or flawed methodology or statistical analysis, that would also cause rejection. Like, make sure that the statistical analysis you're using is correct for the study that you have in mind, and always make sure that you've done that from the study outset. If it has no contribution to the subject or doesn't add anything to the literature, always try to make sure it's novel. If it's too long or short, it can be rejected. Always just try to make sure you are covering it in the appropriate length that warrants the depth of the subject field. If it's a poor style, grammar, punctuation, or English, often this won't necessarily cause rejection, but it will cause rejection if it makes it difficult to actually sort of for the reviewers to understand the content of the article. So do try to make sure that's as correct as possible before submitting. Otherwise, if it's still understandable, then they may simply ask for a small English polishing. If there are missing references, especially if there are key studies that haven't been acknowledged, even if it contradicts your own work, it's always important to acknowledge any key studies, even if it's to explain like why it may not be relevant to your own work or the reasons why it might contradict your own work, or any too much reference to unpublished data. If the article lacks objectivity, minimizes negative results, or overstates efficacy, I'd really encourage you to let the data speak for itself. If the data is great, then it will shine through, and there is no need to do any kind of embellishment around it. So please do stay objective. And then finally, of course, any kind of unethical, libelous or rude behavior would often cause rejection as well. So that's everything I have today. Oh, I see we've gone frozen. I will pass on to Demitra, I think, before inviting any questions. We can do questions at the end. How does that sound, Teresa?
Yep. Everyone, if you would like to have any questions answered, please just put it in the chat, and then we'll deal with them at the end of Demitra's talk. Demitra, please.
Hello, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep, we can see your screen.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. That was great. I'm going to be talking about open peer review, open research and preprint today. But the first thing I'm going to start talking about is an introduction to F1000 research. We launched in 2013 with a mission to rethink and recast the scholarly communication system to speed up the sharing of research, improve transparency, reduce barriers. And we report on basic scientific, scholarly, translational and clinical research across the physical sciences, life sciences, engineering, medicine, social sciences and humanities. So quite a broad scope journal. We describe ourselves as an open research publishing platform where a range of research outputs can be published, with the idea that people can take more control of their own research, make it more author-led, and give them more control over what they choose to publish. So the first thing I want to go into is to discuss a little bit about what open research means. So I've got a poll here and I'd like you to choose what open research means to you. You might also heard of it talked about as open science. Is it a preprint? Is it publishing in an open access journal? Is it publishing your data and software? Is it publishing reproducible protocols and methods? Is it publishing in an open peer review journal? Or is it everything listed in this? So I'm going to hand over to Christy and she can get this poll up and we can see what you've chosen. So hopefully the poll will be up soon and we can see how the audience is split.
Are you able to see it yet?
No, not yet.
Now we can.
Now we can?
Go on again.
Is it showing now?
Yeah, here it is. I've got it.
Okay.
So we're just waiting for the results to come in. It looks like everyone's going with all of the above. Perhaps I shouldn't have put that in there so we could have seen how the rest of the audience was split. Publishing an open access journal, that's definitely an open research behaviour. But yeah, it looks like everyone's going for all of the above. So open research or open science, as you may have heard of it, is essentially an umbrella term for a range of behaviours which aim to make the science you publish more reproducible. So if I go back to my screen now, Christy, thank you. And you should still be seeing the presentation, yeah?
Yeah, it's showing.
Perfect. So it's interchangeable with open science. It's the idea that scientific knowledge of all kinds should be openly shared as early as is practical in the discovery process. And it broadly states that science must be done in an open, reproducible fashion where all components of the research are open. This means that it means different things to different people. But for us, Everything we publish on our platform is open access, usually with a CC BY license. We have quite strict open data policies. This is the idea that data should be freely available to everyone to use and reuse. It allows the verification of scientific claims. It allows others to look at the reproducibility of the results. And it also allows data from many sources to be integrated to give new knowledge. We also have similar views when it comes to software or open source. We ask the authors use open source technology and open up their technologies for other people to use. Open methods, it's quite a simple one. This is just the idea that you've documented the application of the methods as well as the entire process behind it as far as it's practical and provided any relevant documentation. Open peer review, that's the big topic of today. This is essentially the transparent and traceable quality assurance through open peer review, which can include publishing the names and affiliations of the referees as well as their comments. Before we go into open peer review too much, I wanted to talk about the types of articles that you can publish on our platform, because we publish a whole host of article types because research comes in a lot of shapes, so does the research outputs. There tends to be quite an overemphasis on research articles, whereas we try to credit all the different research outputs you can get. And these different article types are applicable across disciplines. So the research article type is one that you're probably quite familiar with. We have a whole host of other article types that you can use, such as the method articles, study protocols, software tools, data notes, and more. We also encourage the publication of null results and reproducibility studies. A little bit difficult to say. This is the whole idea that we're trying to reduce the research waste. There is a pressure in academia to publish results that can be seen as positive or significant. And this is what we call publication bias. And this bias is problematic because the underreporting of negative results distorts the literature in a field of study. So we encourage the publication of these findings to give a more rounded picture of the field of study. So each article type goes through the same peer review process, but the questions that the review has to answer are tailored to each article types. So I wanted to touch on a couple of article types that support open research, these being data notes or data articles, as you may have heard them called, and protocols. So a data note is essentially an article describing a research data set and includes details of why and how the data were created. It typically doesn't include any analysis or conclusions, and if it does, it becomes a research article. The data itself is deposited in a repository, and publishing the data note makes that data set more discoverable and reusable. They adhere to the FAIR principles, which I'm going to talk about a bit later. This is the idea that your data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And you can link and cite this data note in any related research articles. If you're a data expert and you want to get visibility for the work that you do, you can do this via a citable publication. And we have an editorial team at F1000 Research who are really great, and they can advise on any data deposition or any questions you have about data. The second article I wanted to talk about is a study protocol. This is supporting the idea of open methods. A study protocol provides a detailed account of the hypothesis, rationale, and methodology, and it's independently peer-reviewed from the research article. It can inform the experiments to be undertaken in a study, and it's an article type that's particularly popular in clinical trial research and psychology. There's also the option to publish it as a registered report. This is a study protocol that's published and peer-reviewed prior to data collection, and then is followed up by a research article that links back to the registered report. I'm not going to go too much into detail about this here because I've done a webinar on this before, and you can click on the link on the slide if you'd like to know more about registered report. Again, it's a tool for facilitating replicability and reproducibility and reducing research waste. Our articles look like this, and you'll see the open peer review box, the title, and in the middle of that an all metrics box that you can click on. If you click on this, you'll see a range of metrics come up. You can see how many times an article has been viewed and downloaded on our platform and also on PubMed, how many times it's been cited through Scopus and also PubMed and Google Scholar. And if you're into tweeting and Facebook and blogging, you can see how many times an article has been mentioned on those platforms as well. Open peer review is what I'm going to talk about next. This, I think, is going to take up the majority of my talk. So the first thing I wanted to do is start with a poll asking what open peer review means. Is it that authors and reviewers are aware of each other's identity, also known as open identities? Open reports, where the reports are published alongside the article. Open participation, where the wider community are able to contribute to the process. Or an open peer review manuscript, which are manuscripts that are made immediately available prior to any formal peer review procedure. So I'm going to hand over to Christy, and she can show us what's been chosen in the poll. Again, that all of the above option, I shouldn't have put that in there. We should have seen what was chosen. So it looks like we're going to be quite split between the other 4 options on the poll. So a few people going for open identities, a few people going for open pre-review manuscripts, open participation, and the rest seem to go for all of the above. Great, okay, I think we should hand back, because I think that's probably the way it's going to get split amongst the audience. Thanks, Christy. So all of you who went for all of the above, you are absolutely correct. That's because open peer review is an umbrella term for a number of overlapping ways that peer review models can be adapted in lines with open science, which includes making reviewers and authors' identities open, but also publishing review reports and enabling greater participation in the process. This is a quote from an article that was published on F1000 Research looking into what open peer review means. And it was a systematic review of the literature looking for articles discussing open review or open peer review. And they found there were 122 definitions of open peer review. And the systematic review revealed 22 distinct configurations of 7 traits. The full list of traits that you can get for open peer review is listed here. I'm not going to go into all of them. I just wanted to show that open peer review can mean many different things to many different people. And it's very important to understand how the peer review model works in any given journal, whether that be closed or open. The traits that we've incorporated into our peer review model are open identities. That's when the authors and reviewers know who each other are. Open reports, so we publish the reports alongside our articles. And open pre-review manuscripts. Preprints, essentially, you can publish these in places like Archive, bioRxiv, but we've incorporated it into our process as well. Another poll for you, what do you think of when you think of preprints? What words come to mind? Any concerns, any benefits? Just want to get an idea of how you feel about them. So if we can hand over to Christy and see what this word cloud even looks like. Christy? Okay.
Christy is offline, so I think you just continue without it, please.
Okay, no worries. So I'm obviously all for preprints, and because we've incorporated it into our module, and there's lots of reasons why you should consider publishing a preprint. Sorry?
We just skip it.
Sorry, I can't hear what you're saying. Sorry, what was that? I didn't hear what you said. Is that me or
I think Demitra.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, but it's very, very fuzzy. Can you write in the chat?
I think Demitra, just continue. There seems to be a problem with the microphone, but please just continue.
Okay. Great. Now we know what open peer review means. Preprints coming up next. Christy, I think if you just hand to me, then we can continue with the slides. Christy, can you hand control over to me, please? So I can continue. I think we might be having some issues with audio. Okay. Perfect. My screen's back. Thank you. Yeah, so lots of reasons why you should publish a preprint. The first is that most preprints are given a DOI or a unique permanent identifier and are data stamped. So you get credit by publishing a preprint and you are able to show priority. So this means that if there are multiple research groups researching the thing that you are researching and you publish a preprint, you have a time-stamped version of your research, so you can show priority. The second is you get more visibility. Many preprint servers and infrastructure providers link to the final published article wherever possible. This means that your preprint can bring new readers to your published paper. The other thing is that preprints are citable and accrue citations whilst your research is going through peer review. So since 2018, Europe PMC has made preprints searchable alongside the journal published articles, which means if the preprint has been published in a journal, the preprint and published article are linked, which makes them more discoverable. The third is that it allows you to get feedback from the wider community, which can improve your manuscript prior to submitting to a journal or while making revisions. And the last one is application. So there's several funding agencies now which have changed their policies surrounding preprints and are accepting them in applications. So there's a full list here on ASAP Bio's website that you can link to. As Johnny mentioned, having a preprint published is not a problem for most open access journals. It's perfectly acceptable if you submit to us after publishing a preprint. Just check if you've got a specific journal in mind what their policies are around publishing preprints. So the next thing, I'm going to talk a little bit about our peer review model, our open peer review model. So the first thing that we do when we get an article is conduct some pre-publication checks. We look for things like, is it original? Are the authors eligible? Does it meet the research publication standards and any ethical guidelines? Are all the methodological details included? And are the data in accordance with our open data guidelines? So I mentioned we've got quite strict open data policies. We follow this mantra: as open as possible, as closed as necessary. So basically we ask for any data underlying the results to be published in a repository, usually in a CC with a CC0 license, but we understand that sometimes if there's issues with confidentiality, that not all data can be published. We endorse the fair data principles that I was talking about earlier, and if you follow this link on this page, you will find a go-to guide about how to make your data fair. And this is all our part in ensuring the research we publish on our platform is reproducible. And I talked about our data note earlier, which promotes the reuse of data sets. So each article includes a data availability statement, which should provide full details of how, where, and under what conditions the data underlying the results can be accessed. So this is what that looks like on our article. So you see the important thing is that the article includes a route to the underlying data and the code used. So where it's possible to do so, the data should be deposited in a stable and recognised open repository prior to manuscript submission. These repositories are normally subject specific, but again, our editorial team can help with looking for repositories if you need to. Our open peer review process looks like this. So you've submitted to us, it's gone through our peer publication checks, you've met all of our criteria. Once that happens, we send it to the typesetters, and within a couple of weeks, it can be published online. So at this point, the article is open access, it's fully citable, it's got a DOI, it's indexed in Google Scholar and Europe PMC, and it's labelled very clearly as awaiting peer review. So it's sort of like a preprint. As I mentioned, we've incorporated that process into our peer review model, except you wouldn't be able to publish it anywhere else because you've committed to our peer review process. It's the publication of the article that triggers the peer review process, and it's a process which is led by our authors. The authors suggest referees, and as long as they meet our referee criteria, we'll invite them on behalf of the authors. So the names and the affiliations of the referees and their referee report are all published alongside the article. The way I like to talk about it is it's a bit like lifting the lid off the peer review process or peer review live. So the authors are able to respond to the referee comments, and these comments are also published online, and then can submit a new version of their article that addresses these comments. This is where that looping process comes in. All versions of the article are linked and independently citable. And once an article passes peer review, it's indexed in PubMed, PubMed Central, Medline, Scopus, and more. So this is an example of a paper that's just been published. I wanted to show you exactly what it looks like. You can see in the title, it gives you the stage of the peer review process. This is included in the citation, so you know exactly what stage the paper is at. The open peer review box on the side will start to get filled with more details as the article receives reports from the reviewers. Once it starts receiving reports, this is what it will look like. So you can see in the title, the details have now changed. It now says version 3, peer review 2 approved. This status is also included in the citation. Again, the citation updates as the peer review updates. So you know exactly what paper you are citing, what's gone on with the peer review. The details in the open peer review box have also been updated. You can see the names and affiliations have been listed there, along with the status from the referee report. So this can be one of 3 statuses. It can be an approved, so the paper is scientifically sound in its current form and only minor suggestions needed. The second, an approved with reservations. There are some key revisions required. And the last one is not approved. So there's some fundamental flaws in the paper that need to be addressed. This is not a reject, it's not approved. So the authors are still encouraged to submit a second version of their article to revise the comments. You'll also see an amendments box pop up with the second and third versions of the article, just very clearly explaining what's changed between versions, so you don't have to look back to the old version, but you can if you want to. Our open peer review looks like this. You can see on one side we've got the reviewer report with the names and the affiliations, and next to it we've got the response from the authors. The whole idea is to create a constructive dialogue between author and reviewer to improve the work. Both sides are held accountable for their comments, and we have a code of conduct that we expect our authors and reviewers to stick to. Having the review reports open puts articles in context. It's good for early career researchers or people who may be new to the field, and it makes work more accessible. One thing I wanted to point out with these reviews, you can see for the review report there are 4 names listed here. That's because this has been co-refereed. So this is great if you are an early career researcher who tends to work with your PI to do reviews for articles. It means you can get credit as well. These reviews are citable here. You can see you can cite it, which means it's got a DOI. This means you can put it to your CVs, to your ORCID records, and show experience as a reviewer. One way to look at reviews is to look at it as a research output. It's a lot of work from you to help improve another's work. So by adding the names and the affiliations, it means it can be attributed. And if you give it a permanent identifier, it means that we can enable usage metrics, so we can see how many times an article has been viewed and downloaded and cited. As a early career researcher, it might be useful to have a record showing your experience as a reviewer, and having those reviews open might be beneficial to your career if you're applying for new positions. So this is my last slide. I'm hoping you can see how publishing in a more open research format might be beneficial to you. The first is we're very quick because we have this post-publication peer review system where you publish a preprint and then the peer review happens. There's more time for it to be shared throughout the community, more time for the articles to accrue citations. And because it's very transparent, both in the peer review process, but also because of our wide choice of article types, authors have more control over what they publish. The work that we publish on our platform is reproducible because of our open data and open source requirements. And again, because we have this huge range of article types and we encourage the publication of null results and reproducibility studies, we try and reduce the barriers to publishing, both by publishing articles itself, but also in reviewing with the co-refereeing that we have. So that's my last slide. Thank you for listening. Shall we pass back to Teresa?
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Jonathan and Demitra.
Thank you.
This, so yeah. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to put it into the chat. But I thought the last bit that you said about the a bit more visibility for early career researchers if they've been involved in the review process. So I'm just wondering, as an ECR, how can I, be more involved in that? Because obviously, I only get access to review via my PI, my boss. So is this something that early career researchers could maybe reach out to open access journals to inquire about? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I was on mute. So most journals will have what we call a reviewer pool. So we have a list of reviewers that authors can perhaps choose from. If you would like to be part of our reviewer pool, you can get in touch with us and put your name down. Because F1000 Research has this model where we ask authors to suggest referees, and we also have an algorithm which will suggest referees to authors, you can't volunteer to referee an article on F1000 Research. I'm not sure if it would work that way on the other journals, Johnny.
I've realised I was also on mute. Yes, so we do also run a reviewer pool in many of our Taylor & Francis journals. So if you are interested in being added to a reviewer pool, do let it would be best to let the editor-in-chief know. Alternatively, there's an editorial contact available on the website. You can contact them to ask to be added to the reviewer pool. And what that will mean is you'll be added to any paper that comes in that might be relevant to your expertise. Then they'll be able to consider you to be invited as a reviewer for that paper. So it's worth including your kind of expertise and sorts of papers you'd be interested in receiving with that.
Great. But then the other thing, from the polls that Jonathan had at the beginning, I think that's a trend that we see in other countries among other groups of researchers as well, where people have very good opinions of open access. We support that. We think knowledge should be open. It shouldn't be restricted. But then when it comes to actually deciding, I think people are a bit more either torn or it's a challenge. I mean, from a ECR point of view, like myself, things like impact factor, that's what I'm being judged on. I mean, when I apply for grants, first thing people ask is impact factor. They don't ask for my H index, my citation score. So what kind of comments can you give to early career researchers in terms of how to balance this?
I'll start. I think it is a bit of a cultural change that is taking place. This idea that we shouldn't be focusing so much on the impact factor, we should be looking at other alternative metrics. And we are finding that more and more institutions and funders are signing up to what we call DORA, the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment, looking at different ways to assess research and their researchers and their research. So yeah, it's a bit of a cultural change, and my advice would be to start small. You don't have to submit your big research article to a non-impact factor open research journal straight away, but your data, your methods, things that go along with that research article, perhaps to start off with, try submitting those to the more open research journals.
Yeah, that's good advice. I would say I would completely agree with everything that Demitra said. I would also look quite carefully at the aims and scope and what sort of audience you might be targeting. So if you're targeting, think about whether you're targeting a global audience or whether your research is more locally focused. There may be more local journals that may have a more targeted audience to who you might want to reach. And that will usually be outlined in the scope or be made clear on the journal website. So I think trying to consider kind of the audience and the scope will help.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thanks. So I mean, another thing is that, so I mean, A-STAR has made quite a big of a push institutionally to go for open access green, you know, where researchers are being asked to deposit their articles onto an institutional platform. So I think one issue that arose, or there was some confusion on the issue of embargo. So could you maybe comment about that? So I mean, I'm personally unclear about that as well.
Yeah, so I believe for most medical journals that Taylor & Francis publishes, the embargo period is 12 months. However, that may vary by publisher, may vary by journal. So it is worth checking the website, and if you're ever unsure, asking the editorial contact that you have. So that could be the editor-in-chief, or it could be an in-house managing editor at the publisher. But the embargo basically works of one of two ways. Sometimes the publisher will, if it's a very big funder, like a global funder, so for example, with PubMed Central, with depositing onto that as a repository, there are many funders that, because NIH mandates, everything is deposited onto PubMed Central. There are many funders that will automatically recognize that a paper is NIH funded. Whereas for smaller publishers, it would usually be smaller funders, it would usually be author driven. So it would be worth letting the editor-in-chief or other editorial contact know that you have a certain mandate for funding, and to see what they're able to advise, because they can usually give some quite specific advice around that. And usually in those cases, it would be author led. So you can either some systems have a process where you can actually apply an embargo when you first upload it. So you could upload it as soon as the article is published. That accepted author version, that green open access version, and then quite often there's a box to tick or a field to fill out to ask about the embargo period. So in that you could pick 12 months, for example. However, that may not be the case for all platforms. So in those cases, you may need to simply set yourself almost like a reminder to upload it at a later stage once that time limit is up.
Okay, cheers. Yeah, I think we get a ton of email reminders to help. Yeah.
I bet.
Are there any questions from the audience? I think there was a comment about whether these slides will be shared. So I think that they definitely would. I think there's a lot of useful links in both your presentations. where people could check out for more information. So I think, well, we're closing in on 4:30 as well. So I think, I mean, I'll just wrap up then. I mean, thank you so much for a great discussion and for very insightful, you know, take on publishing in open access. I think it was very helpful for me. And I mean, personally, I've not ventured to that. I've tried preprints, but I think I feel a bit more confident with, you know, giving it a stab, like you said, with you know, not necessarily sending the major data, but things like protocols or even negative data that should be out there. So thank you so much, the two of you, for joining us today, bright and early from the UK. And then Suzanne, do you want to finish off?
Yes, thank you so much, Teresa, and thank you again also to Jonathan and Demitra for the wonderful presentations. I wanted to just share my screen just very briefly to also say a little bit about EURAXESS. Can you see my screen? Can you guys see my screen? Yes, I think you can. So just a few words about the organization that I'm representing. It's EURAXESS, which is basically a pan-European network that is dedicated to supporting mobile researchers from anywhere in the world that want to work with collaborators in Europe. We have offices all across the globe. I'm based in Singapore. I'm responsible for Southeast Asia, but we have colleagues in China, in Japan, in India, in North America, in Latin America, in Korea, pretty much all over the globe. And what we're building is a global network of researchers. EURAXESS is really a one-stop information and support tool for researchers like yourselves that are looking for the next opportunity in your career development, and that are also looking for practical advice, like today's webinar on how to get your research published. So what you find on the EURAXESS portal is, of course, opportunities, research jobs, fellowships, funding opportunities by those various European countries. There are currently 36 European countries that are supporting this network, and of course all the grants that are part of the European Union's framework program for research and innovation, Horizon 2020, as you currently know it to be Horizon Europe in just a couple of months. What you also find is a partnering tool, again, very important, I think, for early career researchers that are looking to build a network. You can look for individuals in your field, you can look for research organizations, you can also look for industry partners. A lot of European companies are using EURAXESS to reach out to potential employees. We also have a hosting database. As I said at the beginning, Teresa did her Marie Curie postdoc fellowship in Europe, and she found Copenhagen University. This is not always easy if you don't have a network, but we have this online, basically a database where European institutions say, hey, I'm looking for a postdoc, I'm looking for a PhD student, send me your CV. So wonderful opportunity, once again, to get connected. And we have lots of information out there, information on how to move to Europe, how to work to Europe, how to leave Europe as well, in case we have Europeans listening in today. And I think this is what makes it very exciting. There's a lot of personal assistance. This is a commission-funded project, which means everything is free of charge. And you do get personalized support by real people, not by a bot, but a real person that kind of listens to your story. You want to go to whatever European country and you need some assistance in immigration issues, finding housing, finding a kindergarten place for your children, and of course finding funding. So a great opportunity. I am based in Singapore. Here are my contact details. We do a lot of activities, everything of course online nowadays. As I said, this is my Bukit Batok office for the time being, but normally we have face-to-face meetings. You can always just send me an email if you would like some information, and you can scan the QR code to get access to our website, where you find information on the network and our activities. And I wanted to just use the last couple of minutes to promote this event that we're organizing called Meet My Lab. So we're all trapped in our offices pretty much, but we still want to do work and we want to meet other people. So we've created this platform where we're bringing together research teams working in the same field. And I think this one is interesting to you guys, given that you're all from the biomedical sciences. This is early career researchers in vaccine research. So they will share, you know, what's it like trying to get a vaccine off the ground with a very much condensed time frame, working with pharmaceutical companies, you know, that transaction with industry. This happens on the 22nd of September, 3 o'clock Singapore time. Here's the QR code, the QR code to sign up. And I would love it if some of you could join us. That's it for me. I will just stop sharing my screen. And I think you can see me again, can you? Wonderful. So, and I think this is once again a big thank you to Taylor and Francis, Jonathan, Demitra. That was excellent, really interesting. Teresa, thank you so much. I know you have a grant to submit, so you better get back to business, you know. Grants don't write themselves. And everybody else, thank you for taking the time to join us. As we said, we will share the slides, we will share the recording, and you have Jonathan's and Dimitra's contact details. So whenever you want to publish something, just send them an email. And with this, I think, thanks so much, everyone. Mask up, stay safe, and we'll see each other soon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting us too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Goodbye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, guys.